Marco Rubio just orchestrated one of the most dramatic shifts in U.S. Venezuela relations in decades. And it's only the beginning. When U.S. forces struck a Venezuelan drug boat in international waters this week, killing 11 suspected Tren de Aragua members, it wasn't just another counter-drug operation. It was the culmination of a quarter-century political crusade by America's top diplomat, a man who has made confronting Venezuela his personal mission. Secretary of State Marco Rubio didn't just authorize this strike. He's been building toward this moment his entire political career. And what happens next could reshape the entire Western Hemisphere. So who is Marco Rubio, and why has Venezuela become his obsession? To understand that, we need to go back to Miami, 1971, where a Cuban-American boy grew up hearing stories that would define his worldview forever. Marco Antonio Rubio was born into the American dream, but also into its struggles. His parents had fled Cuba in 1956, just 3 years before Fidel Castro's communist revolution would lock their homeland behind an iron curtain. His father worked as a banquet bartender. His mother split time between being a stay-at-home mom and working as a hotel maid. But it was Rubio's grandfather who shaped his political destiny. The old man had witnessed firsthand how communism destroyed Cuba, and those conversations planted a seed that would grow into a political mission spanning decades. Rubio's path to power began in the most local of arenas, as a city commissioner in West Miami in the 1990s. But he had bigger ambitions. In 2000, he won a seat in the Florida House of Representatives, representing the 111th District. This wasn't just any political rookie. Rubio quickly established himself as a rising star in the Republican Party. By 2003, he was the majority leader, and by 2006, he had become Speaker of the Florida House, one of the most powerful positions in state politics. He served for 2 years in that role, aggressively pushing Florida to the political right and frequently clashing with more moderate voices in the state government. But Rubio's real breakthrough came in 2010 when he ran for the U.S. Senate in what many considered an impossible race. He was facing off against popular Republican Governor Charlie Crist, who had the backing of the party establishment. Rubio was the underdog, the Tea Party favorite taking on the Republican machine. Against all odds, he won, riding a wave of conservative populism that would later help propel Donald Trump to the presidency. From day one in the Senate, Rubio made it clear that Latin America, and specifically confronting leftist governments, would be his specialty. For Rubio, this wasn't just policy, it was personal. Growing up in Miami, he was surrounded by thousands of Venezuelan exiles who had fled the economic collapse and violence under Hugo Chavez and later Nicolas Maduro. These weren't just constituents, they were living reminders of what happens when socialist governments take hold. Chavez had taken power in 1999, beginning what he called a socialist revolution that would transform Venezuela from one of South America's wealthiest nations into a humanitarian catastrophe. As Chavez consolidated power and moved closer to Cuba and other communist allies, Rubio saw history repeating itself. By 2014, Rubio was already making his mark on Venezuela policy. He led the effort to pass sanctions against the corrupt Venezuelan government, despite initial reluctance from the Obama White House. As McClatchy reported, Rubio played a pivotal role in prodding the Obama administration on the matter. In a hearing, in multiple letters, in Senate speeches, his persistence paid off. At the end of 2014, his sanctions bill passed, and the White House began sanctioning individual Venezuelan officials responsible for human rights abuses. But Rubio wanted to go further, much further. In a 2018 interview with Univision, he made a statement that would prove prophetic. "I think that U.S. armed forces should only be used in cases of national security threats. I think there is a strong argument that can be made right now that Venezuela and Maduro's regime have become a threat to the region and to the U.S." This wasn't just tough talk. Rubio was laying the intellectual groundwork for military action. When Trump took office in 2017, Rubio found himself in the perfect position to influence policy. Though he had initially run against Trump in the 2016 Republican primary, and endured constant mockery as Little Marco, Rubio became what many called a shadow advisor on Latin American policy. He was the main driver behind the Trump administration's aggressive sanctions campaign against top Venezuelan officials for human rights abuses and ties to drug trafficking. In the Senate, many of Rubio's televised floor speeches and official statements focused obsessively on Venezuela. By 2019, Rubio was making even bolder arguments. He declared there was a compelling argument that Venezuela presented a national security threat to the United States, citing the presence of Russian military advisors. The enormous majority of Americans do not want Vladimir's military anywhere in our hemisphere. And that's precisely what will happen if Maduro remains in power, he said. That alone is a national security threat to the United States. Many believed Rubio was among the voices that urged Trump to back Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaido in an attempt to unseat Maduro. Then came the 2024 election and Trump's stunning political comeback. When Trump won, he didn't just bring Rubio into his administration, he put him at the very center of American foreign policy. In November 2024, Trump nominated Rubio as Secretary of State, making him the highest-ranking Hispanic American official in U.S. history. The Senate confirmed him unanimously on January 20, 2025, just hours after Trump took his oath of office. But Trump wasn't done elevating Rubio. On May 1, 2025, Trump announced that Rubio would also become acting national security advisor, giving him unprecedented influence over both diplomacy and military policy. This dual role hadn't been held by anyone since Henry Kissinger in the 1970s. Armed with this extraordinary authority, Rubio immediately began reshaping America's approach to Latin America. The Trump administration designated several criminal organizations as foreign terrorist groups, including Venezuela's Tren de Aragua gang. This wasn't just symbolic, it provided legal justification for military action. The administration also deployed 3 U.S. Navy guided missile destroyers to waters off Venezuela as part of what they called a counter-narcotics mission. Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro responded by calling the deployment an extravagant, unjustifiable, immoral, and absolutely criminal and bloody threat. Then came Tuesday, September 2, 2025. The day everything changed. U.S. forces conducted what they called a kinetic strike against a boat in the southern Caribbean.
President Trump announced late today that the United States has sunk a boat after it left Venezuela carrying drugs. It is the first known military strike in the region since President Trump ordered an increased military presence in the Caribbean. Nick Schifrin's following all this, and he joins me now. So, Nick, tell us, what do we know about this strike?
President Trump said that the U.S. Navy operated against that boat that you said it was operated by Tren de Aragua. That has been designated by the administration as a foreign terrorist organization. And the president posted this video on Truth Social this afternoon saying 11 members of the group were sailing toward the United States carrying illegal drugs. And attached to the video, he wrote, quote, "Please let this serve as notice to anyone even thinking about bringing drugs into the United States of America. Beware. Thank you for your attention to this matter." Multiple exclamation points. Now, as you said, President Trump this summer ordered a large Navy and Marine deployment to the area. You see some of the ships there. A Navy official says it includes destroyers, cruisers, as well as smaller ships capable of launching Marines onto shore. And in total, it's thousands of service members, including submarines. The administration describes it as a drug mission and uses the language of war, as Secretary of State Marco Rubio did today.
That officials said was carrying drugs from Venezuela to the United States. The strike killed all 11 people on board, who the administration claimed were members of Tren de Aragua. Trump announced the attack during an unrelated Oval Office event, saying the military had shot out the boat moments ago. He later posted a video on social media showing the moment of impact, but it was Rubio's explanation that revealed the true significance of what had happened. Speaking to reporters in Mexico City the next day, Rubio made it clear this wasn't a one-off operation. Instead of interdicting it on the president's orders, we blew it up, Rubio said. And it'll happen again. Maybe it's happening right now. He argued that traditional interdiction, stopping and arresting drug smugglers, simply didn't work. What will stop them is when you blow them up, when you get rid of them, he declared with conviction.
From the Maduro government in Venezuela.
There has not been today to this strike, at least not in a couple hours, but just yesterday, Nicolas Maduro gave a rare press conference. He described the military deployment by the Trump administration as proof the administration was seeking regime change, and he tried to paint Rubio, not Trump, as the aggressor.
Mr. President Donald Trump, You must be careful because Marco Rubio wants to stain your hands with blood. South American, Caribbean, Venezuelan blood. They want to drag you into a bloodbath, to tarnish the Trump name forever with a massacre against the Venezuelan people, with a terrible war across South America and the Caribbean. This would be a full-scale continental war.
Maduro trying to paint this clearly, Amna, as an inevitable U.S. military effort against Venezuela, which the Trump administration says is not on the cards right now.
Nick Schifrin, thank you as always.
Thank you.
This represents a fundamental shift in how America deals with drug trafficking and, more broadly, with adversarial governments in Latin America. For decades, U.S. policy focused on interdiction, arrests, and extradition. Even when military force was used, it was typically to support local governments or capture specific targets for trial. What Rubio has implemented is something entirely different. Preemptive strikes designed to kill rather than capture, conducted in international waters without warning. The legal justification for this new approach remains murky. While both Rubio and Vice President J.D. Vance have referenced the terrorist designations as rationale, critics argue this is on shaky legal ground. The administration has yet to cite specific legal authority for conducting airstrikes against civilian vessels in international waters. As one former U.S. ambassador told CNN, just without warning, just blowing it up to smithereens in international waters, that's not the way you're supposed to do things. He argued the strike was done for drama, for Hollywood effect. But for Rubio, the drama is the point. This isn't just about stopping drug trafficking, it's about sending a message to the Maduro regime and other leftist governments in Latin America. During his recent trip to Ecuador, Rubio announced that the U.S. was designating 2 more gangs as foreign terrorist organizations, bringing what he called all sorts of options for American action. This time, we're not just going to hunt for drug dealers in the little fast boats and say, let's try to arrest them, Rubio declared. No, the president has said he wants to wage war on these groups because they've been waging war on us for 30 years, and no one has responded. The implications of this new doctrine extend far beyond Venezuela. Analysts warn that the U.S. is essentially repurposing its war on terror playbook for Latin America, potentially opening the door to extrajudicial killings across the region. The authorization for use of military force passed after 9/11 doesn't apply to criminal gangs, even those designated as terrorist organizations. This creates a legal gray area that could have serious consequences for international law and U.S. relationships with allies. Venezuela has already begun responding to the escalation. After the boat strike, Venezuelan fighter jets conducted what officials called a show of force flyover of a U.S. Navy ship. Maduro has deployed military forces to the country's coastline.
We destroyed a drug boat that left Venezuela, operated by a designated narco-terrorist organization, which is what these are. And he's been clear that the days of acting with impunity and having an engine shot down or a couple drugs grabbed off a boat, those days are over. Now we are going to wage combat against drug cartels that are flooding American streets and killing Americans.
Now, that said, regional experts tell me the drug trade is highly decentralized, and fighting it is not usually a military effort. It is traditionally seen as law enforcement. So there are economic tools, there are diplomatic, political tools, and tools used by the Drug Enforcement Agency. So that is what fundamentally has changed. It is the U.S. Navy, not the Coast Guard and the DEA.
And vowed to defend against any possible U.S. attacks. The Trump administration has also announced it's deploying 10 F-35 fighter jets to Puerto Rico to conduct operations against drug cartels, significantly escalating the military presence in the region. For Rubio, this moment represents the culmination of a political journey that began in the exile communities of Miami and has now reached the highest levels of American power. His parents fled one communist regime, and now their son is in position to potentially topple another. The Venezuelan diaspora in Florida, a crucial voting bloc that helped secure Rubio's political rise, is watching to see if their champion can finally deliver on decades of promises. But the stakes extend far beyond domestic politics. Venezuela sits on the world's largest proven oil reserves and controls strategic shipping lanes in the Caribbean. Any major escalation could destabilize global energy markets and potentially draw in other powers. Russia has significant military and economic interests in Venezuela, while China has invested billions in the country's infrastructure. A broader conflict could quickly become a proxy war between major powers. The humanitarian implications are equally staggering. Venezuela is already experiencing one of the worst refugee crises in the Western Hemisphere, with over 7 million people having fled the country. Military action could worsen this crisis exponentially, potentially sending millions more refugees toward the U.S. border, the very problem Trump has promised to solve. Rubio's critics argue that his approach is driven more by political calculation than strategic thinking. The Venezuelan exile community in Florida is a powerful voting bloc, and taking aggressive action against Maduro plays well with these constituents. But critics warn that military intervention could backfire spectacularly, potentially strengthening Maduro's grip on power by allowing him to rally Venezuelans around resistance to American imperialism. Yet Rubio appears undeterred by these concerns. In his recent statements, he's made it clear that the boat strike was just the beginning. "We are going to wage combat against drug cartels that are flooding American streets and killing Americans," he declared. He's also indicated that the U.S. expects its regional allies to join this fight. "Help us find these people and blow them up if that's what it takes," he told reporters in Ecuador. The international community is watching nervously. Many Latin American governments have deep concerns about U.S. military intervention in the region, given the long history of American involvement in regional conflicts. Even governments that oppose Maduro are worried about the precedent being set. If the U.S. can conduct preemptive strikes against vessels from Venezuela, what stops it from doing the same against other countries? Meanwhile, the operational details of the new policy remain unclear. How does the U.S. determine which vessels to target? What intelligence is required before ordering a strike? Are there any restrictions on where such operations can be conducted? The administration has provided few answers to these questions, raising concerns about accountability and oversight. What we do know is that this represents a fundamental shift in American foreign policy, driven by one man's decades-long crusade against Venezuelan socialism. Marco Rubio has spent 25 years in politics building toward this moment, from his early days in Miami city government to his current role as America's top diplomat. His personal story, shaped by his family's experience fleeing communist Cuba, has become American policy. The question now is whether this new approach will achieve its stated goals or whether it will spiral into something much larger and more dangerous. Rubio clearly believes that decades of traditional diplomacy and law enforcement have failed and that only military force can break the power of criminal organizations and hostile governments. His critics warn that this path leads toward endless conflict and potential catastrophe. What's certain is that Tuesday's boat strike marks a turning point, not just in U.S. Venezuela relations, but in how America projects power in its own hemisphere. For better or worse, Marco Rubio's vision of confrontational diplomacy backed by military force is now being put to the test. The Venezuelan crisis that began with Hugo Chávez's rise to power in 1999 may finally be reaching its climax, with a Cuban-American politician from Miami holding the keys to war and peace. As Rubio himself said, "This is just the beginning. More strikes may already be happening as you watch this video." The boy who grew up hearing his grandfather's stories about communist Cuba is now in position to potentially reshape the political map of Latin America. Whether that reshaping leads to liberation or chaos remains to be seen. But one thing is clear, Marco Rubio's long desire to confront Venezuela has finally found its moment, and the consequences will reverberate across the Americas for years to come.